Yeah, started.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Education and Children's Social Care Overview and Scrutiny meeting. It's lovely to have you all with us. As usual, just to advise you that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. And members of the press and public may record and take photographs, except where there are confidential items. We have had some apologies today. So we've had apologies from Justine Lomas, Sarah Smith, Councillor Bano and Asamagi Obi. 3 on the agenda are declarations of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and other registrable interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. Are there any interests to declare? There are no interests to declare. We move on to item 4, which are the action notes from that are in your packs. I hope you've had a chance to have a look through them. Is there anything on there that anybody needs to raise? Councillor Hughes?
I think, Chair, we've asked for information that came from the Cabinet Member's report a few minutes ago about the departments. She reported that there were 20 service departments within the portfolio, and we simply asked what they were, bearing in mind that there's presumably a list of these departments for someone to have toppled them up. I can't see why it's taken us so long to get that, and as we'll see later on, there's been another department created to add to that list, Chair. Like I say, I cannot understand why it's taken so long to produce that list when it must exist.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. That's actually on the action tracker, isn't it? We're on the action notes from the...
Right, yeah.
But we'll revisit that in just a moment. So we've got 3 sets of action notes that we need to agree. So the meeting held on the 30th of November, the reconvened meeting held on the 25th of January, and the committee meeting held on the 4th of January. So do one at a time, will that be easier? So the notes from the 30th of November, is everybody happy with those? I'll take silence as a yes, thank you. The reconvened meeting held on the 25th of January. Yep, everybody happy? And then the committee meeting held on the 4th of January. Move on to the action tracker and we can pick up that point that you raised, Councillor Hughes. So, yeah, we have got that on from the 7th of September meeting, the structure chart for the Children's and Family Directorate to be provided. But they haven't had that. No. We are still waiting for that, Councillor Hughes, so we will chase that.
I'll chase it up.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
As I said, Chair, the list must exist for somebody to account the number of
numbers. Yeah, we will chase up because I know that we did when that was raised at meeting. We were quite anxious to have a look at that.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly relevant, Chair. In the last meeting, we were told that all these departments had been baselined. So, I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to get to see the baselining, but if we don't know what the departments are that are being baselined, then I can't see the point of being told that they exist in the first place.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. We will ask for that to be sent through with a note with the commentary that you've just given us.
Thank you, Chair. And just finally, I can't remember where this comes. The Cabinet Member pointed out last week that there was a plan with 5 work streams, 34 projects, 297 actions, and it was agreed with the Director that would be made available to us. It hasn't been, as far as I know. So again, as that's already existing, I'm presuming we should be able to get hold of it very quickly.
We'll make a note of that one as well, Councillor Hughes, and we'll make sure that's followed up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other items on the action tracker that members wish to raise? Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next main item, which is school attainment and school improvement.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, Councillor Hughes, is it going to be one of those days today?
I'm afraid I suspect it is. The minutes of the last meeting.
Yep.
Um,
We've already agreed.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I'm not paying attention there. There was an item on there, the Children and Families Improvement Plan. I raised some concerns about that in the meeting. I did raise concerns that I believed it was lacking in substance and that it didn't contain any information by which progress could be measured over time. Now, I think the actual minutes, without any acknowledgement of my comments, just look a bit skewed. So I would like to have my concerns acknowledged.
That means you need to give us the wording that you want, and it needs to be agreed by the committee. If you're changing action notes.
Well, it's not an action note, it's a minute.
That's what they're called, action notes.
So if you're changing them, you need to put in what you want, and then they need to agree
So-
that they want that.
Well,
So if you come up with the words, we'll put them forward to the next meeting, and then if they're agreed, we'll have them included. No, we can't do that. No. Oh, it needs to be done now. Then, Councillor Hughes.
No, then I think
Yeah.
very quickly, Chair, that I raised concerns that there wasn't much of substance in the update. That there wasn't any information in there by which progress could be measured over time.
Just read that out to Councillor Hughes.
So you're saying Councillor Hughes raised concerns that there was little substance in the update and no progress for how they can be measured over time.
No information by which progress could be measured over time.
Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
Just to point out that the list of numbers that I was just quoted as providing was the answer to that point, that there is a detailed plan, which we will make sure you've got.
Are members happy with the words to be included in those notes?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now move to item 7. Item 6 even, skipping an item now. School attainment and school improvement. So we have Claire Williams from BEP, Tim Boys, Chief Executive from BEP. Is Claire Nankerville here? Yeah. Yep. We have Claire Nankerville and Kate Reynolds. Yes. Kate Reynolds is the Assistant Director for Lifelong Learning and Employability. I don't know who wants to kick off.
I'm going to kick off.
Councillor McCarthy, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to kick off with the first slide with information on, which is slide 3. Then I'll be handing to Kate, and Kate will eventually hand to Tim. So just to provide a little bit of context, the data that we're looking from is very much from the middle of the COVID period, and during that time attainment rates have fallen across the country in early years and primary, and this has been referred to by researchers as the COVID gap. Across the age ranges, we've got some common patterns in Birmingham: higher rates of achievement for disadvantaged and free school meal pupils, lower rates of achievement for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and higher rates of achievement and progress than core cities and statistical neighbours. Across the age ranges, children from white and Asian, other white and Black Caribbean backgrounds underperform compared with their national counterparts. Children from Gypsy and Roma backgrounds have the lowest attainment, and those of Chinese backgrounds have the highest. We have strong performance at Key Stage 4 and A levels, and in post-16 settings, there is stronger performance in colleges for applied and vocational courses post-16, and in schools for A levels. And Kate will now get into some of the detail that's in the slide pack.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, and thank you, Chair. Can we just put on the record our thanks to Claire, who's sitting on my left, who has produced this report, and indeed the supplementary report, which gives you an entertainment for the academic year 21-22. A very, very thorough report, I think you'll find. I thought it might be helpful just to members of the committee to know that the definition of disadvantage is that a child or young person has had free school meals over 6 years, or is a child looked after, or has been adopted. So that's the definition of disadvantage, because you'll see throughout the report we refer to disadvantage and free school meals, so two separate measures there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take you through this report. What we've done for this year for you, Chair, is that actually each key stage we've started with a little summary, and then we've gone into detail for you. We thought that might be helpful to members. We move to the early years foundation stage. Generally looking at Birmingham, the proportion of pupils attaining a good level of development at the end of early years has fallen nationally and locally. As Councillor McCarthy has said, that's what people are referring to as the COVID gap. So we can see the impact of children not being at school starting to feed through the system. Birmingham is still below the national average for a good level of development, but the gap has narrowed, and you'll see that time and time again. So actually the gap is narrowing across the system. And when we get, as Councillor McCarthy has pointed out, to the end of the system at GCSE and A level, we're actually performing above national averages. But at early years, Birmingham attainment rates are higher than the core cities and statistical neighbours. So if we move to the next slide, please. Gives you details in terms of the early years foundation stage profile. And here we can see the average percentage of children achieving a good level of development at the end of early years has fallen nationally and locally. We've just talked about that. That's the impact of COVID. So while Birmingham remains below the national average, we have seen a slightly smaller drop in attainment, and we're now 2.5. So that's what I mean. Gently, the gap is narrowing across the education system in terms of our sitting behind national averages. So we can have the next slide, please. Here is the scores on the doors, the league tables, which we would like to be at the top of course. And you can see in terms of stat neighbours, we are fourth, ranking fourth, but we're up 2 in terms of that academic year, so nudging gently towards the top. And then in terms of core city, we're up 1, ranking 3rd against the core cities. Core cities average is 60.9. Our stat neighbours is 61.2. And as I've just said, we've improved our ranking in terms of that particular league table. So very good performance there. We move to the next slide, which is around ethnicity. As Councillor McCarthy has outlined, in terms of pupils from Chinese backgrounds, they are doing very well, both above the national average for that cohort and above the national average for all cohorts. That's shown at the top there as 74.9%. However, at the other end of the scale, unfortunately, our pupils who come from a Gypsy Roma background are not doing so well, and they are significantly below national averages and actually below in terms of that specific cohort. Other lower performing groups include Black Caribbean, Irish, other white and Black African, other mixed white, British and Indian compared to their national equivalent groups. But that gap is narrowing and narrowing over time. So good work there. Next slide, please. In terms of early years, you'll see we have some excellent performance across the city, particularly in wards such as Sutton, Bourneville and Cottridge, Hall Green South and Yardley East. But we also have some lower performing wards, Allen Cross, Ladywood, Sparkbrook, Balsall Heath East, Soho and Jewellery Quarter and Shard End. So that gives you a sort of cross authority representative. So if we move to key stage 1, would you like me to stop at the end of each key stage, or do you want me to do the whole report?
No, I think you carry on, Kate, and then we'll do the questions.
Report, yeah. So in terms of key stage 1, so moving on when our children are entering compulsory education, the proportion of pupils attaining the expected standard in key stage 1 has also fallen nationally and locally for reading, writing, maths and phonics. Birmingham is still below the national average, but the gap has narrowed. As I said, we're gently nudging away at picking ourselves up and making sure that we're above national average. Disadvantaged children, and I gave you the definition at the start there, and those receiving free school meals have higher rate of achievement in Birmingham than nationally. So that's a really good news story in terms of those disadvantaged groups. However, children with SEND, and Councillor McCarthy referred to this, have lower rates of achievement in Birmingham than nationally, and the gap has widened. And you'll see across the system that that particular group of young people, children and young people, have lower rates of achievement across the whole of the system. Our attainment rates are higher than core cities and StatNeighbour averages in Key Stage 1. So if we move to the next slide there. In line with national, the average percentage of children achieving the expected standard for reading, writing and maths in Birmingham has fallen since last undertaken in 2019. And whilst Birmingham remains below national across all three subjects, the gap has narrowed in reading and writing, but it remains the same in maths. So you can see the gap narrowing there, as I've said before. If we move on then again to the league tables in reading, writing and maths, you can see we are nudging upwards, so up 2 in terms of StatNeighbours for reading, up 2 in terms of StatNeighbours for maths, and up 1 in writing in terms of our StatNeighbours. For all three subjects, Birmingham is above core cities and StatNeighbours averages and has shown improvement in the rank within each of the comparator groups. So that's what I said. We are gently nudging up those particular league tables and gently nudging towards national averages. So if we look at the specific characteristics of Key Stage 1 pupils, the attainment for disadvantaged and free school meals pupils in Birmingham for reading, writing and maths is above the national equivalent group. So that's a really good news story there. However, as we've said, Birmingham's young people who have SEND are behind by at least 3% or more in all three subjects, and those with education and healthcare plans are below by nearly 9%, 8.8% for maths. We move on then to the next slide in terms of phonics. Pupils are achieving at least the expected standard of phonics decoding. Pupils are achieving at least the expected standard of phonics decoding, but it's fallen locally and nationally since 2019. And that's a national issue as well as a local issue, but we're in line with national in year 1 and slightly behind for children at the end of year 2. So if we move to the next slide, again, phonics in terms of the league tables here. Lovely to see Birmingham there in terms of core cities ranking first in terms of the standard of phonics decoding required by the end of year 1, up 1 from second last year. In terms of StatNeighbours, you can see there we went up 3 in terms of the ranking, up 2 in terms of decoding at the end of year 2, up to rank 6 in terms of StatNeighbours and first in terms of core cities. My colleague Tim Boys, of course, will be talking about the things that Birmingham Education Partnership is putting in place to make sure that that improvement is actually continued throughout the system, and Tim will talk at the end of my presentation. If we move then on to phonics at Key Stage 1, the attainment for free school meals and disadvantaged pupils for year 1 in Birmingham is above national by 2.9% for those children with free school meals and 7.2% for those from a disadvantaged background. Our lower performing groups continue to be those with SEND, but also those with English as an additional language and those with an education and healthcare plan. As I say, Councillor McCarthy talked about that right at the start. We move then on to stage 2. As I say, you can start to see that the gap becomes narrower and narrower. So the proportion of pupils attaining the expected standard in Key Stage 2 has fallen nationally and locally. More Birmingham children achieve the expected standard in grammar, punctuation and spelling than nationally. Disadvantaged children and those receiving free school meals have high rates of achievement in Birmingham than nationally. And as Councillor McCarthy has said, we can see that throughout the whole system. However, children with SEND have lower rates of achievement in Birmingham than nationally. Progress for Birmingham children is above the national, core city and StatNeighbours averages for reading and maths and below for writing. Birmingham attainment rates are higher than the core city and statistical neighbour averages. So if we move on to the next slide, Key Stage 2, the percentage of pupils attaining key measures at Key Stage 2 for Birmingham against national. You can see that in terms of expected there, we are actually above national, and in terms of high, we are as well. So overall, Birmingham is below the national average of attainment in reading, writing and maths. Individually, the largest attainment gap is in writing. However, in maths, we are slightly above the national average for those children working at a greater depth. In grammar, punctuation and spelling, Birmingham is above the national average in both measures. So that's good to see there. We move over then in terms of the trend information. Since 2019, overall attainment in combined reading, writing and maths has declined nationally. In Birmingham, however, at individual subject level, reading has seen an improvement, especially in Birmingham, where the gap has narrowed to 2.7%. Writing saw a significant drop in children working at the expected level nationally and within Birmingham. So a trend of narrowing that gap, as I've said, throughout the system. So again, we like to look at the stat neighbours and the core cities. I know that members are particularly keen on seeing that. Moved up 1 in terms of Birmingham and stat neighbours for Key Stage 2 and up 2 in terms of core cities. Birmingham's reading, writing and maths attainment is above the core city average and 0.3% below the stat neighbours average. We also show an improvement for each comparative. Birmingham is above core cities and stat neighbours averages for reading and maths in Key Stage 2 and below these groups for writing progress in Key Stage 2. If we turn then to progress, children in Birmingham have made more progress than those from a similar starting point nationally across reading, writing and maths. In Birmingham, reading has seen the most significant increase in progress, which then exceeds the gap which was behind the national average in 2019 to be significantly above in 2022. So really good news there in terms of reading at Key Stage 2. We move on to pupils attaining at least the expected level of attainment in reading, writing and maths. The attainment for disadvantaged pupils in Birmingham is 48.6 compared to 42.6 nationally. When we compare this to non-disadvantaged pupils, there is a gap of 16.8% in Birmingham, which is smaller than the national gap. So as I said, we can see we are nudging towards national averages, sometimes exceeding those, and our disadvantaged children and young people are doing well out of the school system. Whilst this gap has widened since 2019, it has only done so by 2.3% compared to 3.2% nationally. Moving on then to those attaining at least the expected level of attainment. The attainment for SEND pupils is 15.8% compared to 18.1% nationally. As Councillor McCarthy has said, throughout the system, SEND pupils are not doing as well as we would like them to. So when we compare this to non-SEND pupils, there's a gap of 52.7% in Birmingham, which is obviously wider than the national gap of 50.8%, so a roughly 2% gap there. SEND support pupils in Birmingham are below by 2.8%, and those with an education healthcare plan are below by 3%. So moving on to SEND pupils at Key Stage 2, reading, writing and maths progress. In 2022, so academic year 21-22, so summer 22, these key stages would have been examined. Examined is the wrong word, but you know what I mean by that. In 2022, in Birmingham, all SEND pupils made more progress than their SEND national equivalents, especially in reading and maths. Writing shows the least progress overall, with SEN support pupils slightly below their national equivalent, whereas those with a plan had made less progress, but better than their national equivalent. So again, nibbling away at that gap, but in terms of SEND, that gap is slightly bigger. So if we look at Key Stage 2 and ethnicity, those pupils attaining at least the expected level of attainment. Again, we can see our pupils from a Chinese background exceeding the overall national figure and the group figure. However, at Key Stage 2, our pupils from other Asian backgrounds outperform both the national figure and the cohort figure there. Again, sadly, at the bottom, our Gypsy Roma community is part of the lower performing group. So that's the ethnicity analysis there. And we have a lovely chart with very, very small figures on it, which is quite difficult to read, but never mind, which is the sorry? It's very pretty. It's very pretty, but anyway, this looks at the difference to the local authority average for Key Stage 2 reading, writing and maths, at least expected by ethnic groups. So this is ethnic group, gender and disadvantage. So those who are high performing disadvantaged ethnic groups who are 5% more above the local authority average include Chinese, Bangladeshi, other Asian and Black African groups. Those who are below the local authority average, so not the national average in this case, but the local authority average, are white and black, Black Caribbean, white British, other white Asian and other white. Okay, then we move on again at Key Stage 2 to a ward breakdown. We have some high performing wards here in Sutton, Hall Green South, Perry Bar, Brandwood and Kings Heath. However, we have some lower performing wards, which include Holyhead, Allens Cross, Northfield, Soho and Chilbury Quarter and Castle. Key stage 4, as committee members will know, we skip key stage 3 because that doesn't have a performance measure against it, and we move to key stage 4.
Kate, on that
Sorry.
last slide,
Yeah.
the ward maps.
Yeah.
I can't remember, so I'm asking, and I'm sure the committee will be interested. Is that where they live or where they go to school?
Claire?
It's where they live.
It's where they live.
Thank you.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. Thank you, Claire. So moving on to key stage 4, in a sense, almost at the end of the system now. Birmingham pupils attainment 8 is slightly below the national level. Progress 8 measure is higher in Birmingham than nationally. Disadvantaged children and those receiving free school meals have higher rates of achievement in Birmingham than nationally. Children with SEND have lower rates of achievement in Birmingham than nationally. And Birmingham rates are higher than core city and stat neighbour averages for attainment 8 and particularly for progress 8. So moving on, these are provisional figures and we'll have the validated figures when, Claire?
Final data cut, I think, has just been released. What we'll do is check against it. It's really unlikely that it will change. So
Yeah.
these are unlikely to change,
Yeah.
which is why we publish this now, but we will check against it.
Yeah. So we'll bring to committee if there's any significant differences, if that's okay through you, Chair.
I'd be really surprised.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Lovely. So progress 8 is measuring 0.07. In 2022, Birmingham had a positive progress 8 score. The state funding average is minus 0.03 and is slightly below the national average for attainment 8. English and maths attainment is good, being slightly below the average attainment for pupils achieving a 9 to 4 grade, but above average for those achieving a strong pass 9 to 5. English back attainment continues to be above the national average in all the main measures. Then we have the progress 8 compared to core cities and stat neighbours. Again, you can see Birmingham third down there, in Enfield and Leeds outperforming us in terms of progress 8. Birmingham ranks third overall when combining the two groups, second within core cities and second within stat neighbours. And I know, Councillor McCarthy, we were quite interested in the fact that we were second in both of those, but actually we still come out third in the rankings. But that's the way the data works, isn't it?
We're second in both groups.
Two together, actually, not just third.
Because the people above us in both are different.
Different, yeah.
Yeah.
Leeds is at the end of the
Stage 4 attainment comparisons to here we've separated out core cities and stat neighbours in the previous slides, those we combine. Lovely to see that we are top of core cities and we are top of stat neighbours. So our average attainment 8 score places us first within the core cities group and joint first in comparison to our stat neighbours, which is excellent because we're a B rather than an E. We managed to be at the top of the stat neighbours rather than being second to Enfield. So that's rather pleasant, isn't it? Core city averages and stat neighbours averages are given to you there as well. Looking then at the disadvantaged pupils gap, attainment gap in Birmingham, disadvantaged pupils achievement is higher than disadvantaged pupils nationally, both average attainment 8 and the percentage achieving a strong pass in English and maths. The gap in attainment to non-disadvantaged pupils is also smaller in Birmingham to national, but it has widened slightly. So moving on then to SEND pupils, as we've said throughout, SEND pupil attainment is not as good as we would like it to be. In 2022, SEND pupil attainment was below other SEND pupils nationally and in all attainment measures except for attaining grades 9 to 5 in English and maths. In Birmingham, the gap in attainment to national is much smaller for SEN support pupils than those for on an education healthcare plan. And again, then at key stage 4, we have SEND pupils progress 8 in Birmingham versus national figure. In Birmingham in 2022, SEND pupils have made significantly more progress than SEND pupils nationally. So this is what I mean about nibbling away at that gap. When broken down into the groups, SEND support pupils in Birmingham make significantly more progress than SEND support pupils nationally. However, those with a plan make less progress than either equivalent nationally, but not significantly so. We then move on, as we have done with all the key stages, to ethnicity here. Again, at key stage 4, we can see those pupils from a Chinese background, again, exceeding the overall national average, but also exceeding the cohort average as well. And then sadly, again, at the bottom of the ethnicity league table there, we have our pupils from our Gypsy Roma community. Then we have another one of these wonderful slides about the difference to Birmingham's Progress 8 score by ethnic group. And there we can see the high performing groups, those who are above the local authority. So Birmingham's own average include Indian, other white, other ethnic group, other Asian, Bangladeshi and Black African groups. Those below Birmingham, so the local authorities average include white British, Black Caribbean, white and Black Caribbean, white Asian and white and Black African groups. Okay, then moving on to Key Stage 4.
Right.
So Key Stage 4, I'm still on Key Stage 4.
With the map.
Key Stage 4 with the map, yeah. Key Stage 4 with the map. We can see here that we have a number of high performing wards: Sutton Wards, Edgbaston, Harborne, Bourneville and Cottridge, Ball Green South and Moseley, and then some low performing wards: Shard End, Franklin, Great Park, Kings Norton South, King's Standing and Castle Vale. We move into our post-16 area, and here Birmingham performance at A level is higher than national core city stat neighbours and regional averages. In state-funded schools, so that's both the locally maintained schools and the academies, and all of these figures include both locally maintained and our academy schools. In state-funded schools, 25.4% of students achieved at least 3 or more A levels of A star to A, compared with 21.6 nationally, so that's a hugely positive result. More students have been entered for applied general and tech level qualifications, with Birmingham being 2.5% higher than national. The average grade achieved for applied general qualifications has improved and remains above the national average. So as I say, at the end of the system, pupils and young people are doing quite well. Disadvantaged children achieved higher average grades in Birmingham than nationally, and we've got a stronger performance in colleges for applied and vocational courses as compared to the academic courses in schools. Yeah. So in terms of academic routes, best to stay on at school, but if you're more vocationally inclined, our FE colleges and our colleges and post-16 serve you very, very well as well. So here's the headline measures on the next slide. Students in Birmingham from state-funded sixth form schools achieve on average a slightly higher grade than those in state-funded sector, including colleges. However, both sectors have achieved a higher than average point score than their direct national equivalent. Same applies to applied general studies. At post-16, it's a bit trickier, Claire, isn't it, to get some of the figures and some of the breakdowns. So moving on to the next slide, which shows the state-funded schools and colleges. The state-funded schools and colleges, Birmingham is showing an upward trend in the percentage of pupils entered for a level 3 qualification, and that is now 1% higher than the national equivalent. Entries in applied general qualifications have been increasing since 2018, both in Birmingham and nationally. Birmingham with 2.5% more entries in 2022 for state-funded schools and colleges. Similarly, tech level entries have also been increasing at a much slower rate. If we look at 16 to 18 in terms of A-level performance indicators, students in Birmingham state-funded schools achieve higher than national averages across all the main attainment measures for A-levels. Trend is also present for state-funded schools and colleges. Birmingham students perform better than national students for all A-level measures. And then moving, as we have done before, to our core cities and our stat neighbours figures. You can see Birmingham there, second in terms of core cities and second in terms of stat neighbours. And again, second throughout all that system. In the average point scores achieved at A levels and in applied general qualifications in 2022, Birmingham ranked second out of the 8 core cities and second out of the 11 when comparing to stat neighbours. So that has taken you through the whole of the system. Huge amount of detail there, as I say. I thank Claire for her work on that. I'm going to turn to Tim, who's going to talk about the work that's being done through BEP to make sure that those improvements are built upon and some of those gaps are narrowed. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, councillors. And I have to say, having sat through several years of such reports, I thought it was an excellent report, Claire. We were very grateful for it as well. I mean, one of the reasons why we're grateful for it is because of the consistency across all the key stages. You see a story that story of closing gaps with our neighbours, even through the COVID period, I think it's really easy for us centrally to be a bit generic in thanking schools, but the truth is that schools across the board have done something pretty impressive in closing that gap through such a difficult time. And it's been an interesting experience because all of us in schools felt deflated when we got results and saw that standards had dropped. And then when we realised that we've actually closed the gap on elsewhere in the country, you realise that all the hard work has maybe yielded something after all. So whilst schools are in no way able to ignore the significance of the challenge of COVID, it's great to have such a clear picture of things to celebrate. And the two things historically that I think we're most clear of in that data is the really practical work that BEP's been able to do supporting schools through the pandemic in a whole load of ways. And largely BEP works through making sure we amplify good practice by practitioners. BEP isn't a powerhouse of special people who've got lots of answers. We're really a mechanism for making sure that the schools that are doing the best work anywhere in the city have their work spotlit and shared so that other people can benefit from it, learn it, and move the good ideas around. And that certainly was true in COVID, where people were having to think on their feet, and we were able to share people's problem solving and solutions and work effectively in that way. And the other thing that has been a BEP priority from pre-COVID and that was able to be sustained through COVID was really the focus on reading. And so it's great again to see the clear improvement in our reading scores, particularly in primary. Just to say a little bit about how BEP is working, we have a new 7-year contract with the city. Relatively, this is the first time we've reported on outcomes as a result of that, or in the context of that contract. And our strategy that we very much shared with officers is to put all of our focus, the huge amount of our effort and resource into Key Stage 1 and 2, into primary. Because as you've just seen from that data, actually at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, that we're in a stronger position. And so the gaps with national are biggest in Key Stage 2. And where that was in reading, we're clear now about where the gaps are much more in writing. Before reading, we focused on maths. And it's not that when you look at any one school, it's so clear that it's always reading that's stronger. So work changes in individual schools, but with a limited resource, we have to prioritise. And so our big strategic work, we try to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. And the reason why I brought Claire with me is because she's one of those frontline people. Claire used to be a head teacher in Birmingham, who's one of our small team of primary experts who are leading on a lot of our primary strategies. And so I thought you might want to get a little flavour of what that looks like. But our focuses or our foci currently are looking at Key Stage 2 transition up into Key Stage 3, looking at curriculum development because we have a preoccupation with wanting to support schools through the Ofsted trauma. And we know that Ofsted are a great learning stimulus, but they're hard work. And the framework that schools now carry is particularly exacting for primary schools without specialists needing to deal with individual curriculum areas. And then a really big focus on high quality teaching. And as you'll be reassured to hear in terms of what we've just heard, writing being the absolute priority of the big areas that get assessed. The last thing really to say is the through line of the concern about SEND and the achievement of SEND pupils in all the key stages. And in that area, we're not just focused in secondary, we're very much integrated into a project which we're not focusing on today, but it's the Developing Local Provision project, which has been an investment from the High Needs Block in really helping groups of schools together to work to improve what they can do for pupils with SEND, that's SEND support and EHC plans. And what's been good about that project is that it's been one where groups of schools locally have identified their priority. So it's not the same across the city. It's different in primary and secondary. There are some key themes that come out, but that's an area that we have been working on. And then lastly, picking up on the ethnicity point, I'm really pleased that Kate and I have been able to work together recently and say again, from all of those figures, Kate consistently showed that Gypsy, Roman and Traveller children do the worst, our Chinese children do the best. That the good and bad news about both of those stories is those are tiny numbers of children. Actually, when you look at the bigger populations, the thing that really comes across in primary and secondary is the underperformance of African Caribbean heritage children and of some mixed race children of different kind of combinations. And so we're talking to a major provider from outside of the city and looking to put quite a big investment into a programme of learning and support for all schools, primary, secondary, maintained academy, everybody, so that we can really address that kind of pattern and that concern that previously we've not managed to remedy. So, I'm Chair. I'm really keen that members who've listened so much get a chance to ask us questions, and that we're not talking at you. There is a real balance of the fact that we are wanting to celebrate what schools have done well, and at the same time say we're not happy that we're not the best. And it's interesting in all of those comparators with stat neighbours that it was Enfield and Waltham Forest. It's the two London boroughs that constantly outperform us. And so when we look at our data collectively, we within BEP always compare ourselves to the London boroughs as well, because they're kind of the best in class at the moment. And when we look at some quite challenged, diverse areas of London with quite high levels of poverty, they're doing much better than we are. And so I want to say right at the outset, we're in the business of improvement. And so welcome the kind of questions that I know that you'll have, because my experience is that members want to see things together as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. I'll go straight to Councillor Clancy in just a second. Sorry, Councillor Clancy. Because that's an awful lot of information, and we are grateful for the level of information, but there is an awful lot to take on board there. And I mean, I've read through the papers, I don't know how many times, and clearly, I haven't been able to retain all of that information. So forgive us if we have questions that might have been covered. But I've got questions, but I'll let other colleagues come in first. Councillor Clancy.
I thought I was being done. I was actually looking at the screen more than I was at my own laptop, Chair, because it was a shame actually, because you had great slides. And I know you said about the detail at the beginning, and you're right, the detail, the devil is in the detail. But you had the slides which did were similar to ours, but you had key points at the side of yours on screen that we didn't have. And actually any presentation given to us as a committee, please ensure what you read from is the same as what we get. Detail is great, but I just didn't see the key points that I was trying to look on screen, because condensing it into key points would have been far more useful. Yeah. Not dumbing us all down, speaking for myself here, but I'm going to work back slightly through the presentation. Tim, really interesting what you've just sort of condensed there. And you are right, because in our executive summary, talking at the Key Stage 4 process, that is a stronger point. But in our executive summary, it does mention the CAGs and the tags. So at Key Stage 4, there seem to be centre assessments that had taken place in 20 and 21, and the teacher assessments, the tags, grades. So I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form that has an emphasis or influence on the stronger side of the Key Stage 4, but it does mention the CAGs, centre assessment grades and teacher assessed grades. So I don't know whether that was formed part of the strength. I don't know, you might want to come back.
No, very, very simply. And I mean, just to say, Claire's a primary head teacher until very recently, and I spent 15 years as a secondary head teacher. So between us, we ought to be able to explain technically kind of how things work. And that's the other bit of the complexity of the report. But just to say that the 20 and 21 data is not included in this at all, because the national agreement was that we wouldn't judge school performance by that. So what you've looked at is 2022 real live GCSEs and A-levels assessed in the way that they've always been assessed. And when we've looked at progress over time, we've compared back to 19 and 18 when we last had the real thing. So 2021 is just kind of in a dark, shady cupboard somewhere.
We did provide a report, I think, on the attainment in 20 and 21, just as freestanding report, because it isn't comparable to anything previously or subsequent.
Very quick, Chair. I just want to refer to the wards as well. We've got the ward maps. Back in the day, Tim, I remember you when I was on this committee in 15, 16, and I think we brought up back then about comparisons of wards. Obviously, you've got strengths, not so strong. We talked back then about best practice and about how schools really, as a city, I'm talking Birmingham, forget the core cities, forget anywhere else, we're talking about Birmingham. Our city, our wards, we obviously have the good parts and not so good parts. What progress, really, I know we've had the COVID, the pandemic, but really moving forward, because there are some good positives in here across all the key stages, but there are negatives, there's no doubt about that. But what are we doing with the best practice aspect? Because we covered this before and don't know what that piece of work entails. Why are you good? Why are we not so good? Yeah. One ward away. What's that down to, and how are we linking that up to better connect with best practice?
So the biggest good news story that I would want to give you from just the BEP world, but actually is incredibly significant for everything that Sue is doing, is the work, and COVID helped us in some ways with this. And certainly our new strategy or our new ways of working has helped us with this, is the work that's happened to strengthen the local groups of schools. Birmingham is so big that unless you have a good way of chunking it down and getting people together to talk to each other and work together, then it's really hard to get that kind of sharing and that information across. So just to give you a little bit of our kind of nuts and bolts. In the past, so back in those ancient days when we sat here together, 2016, I think you're right, showing how long we've been here, that in the past, all of our work was, if you like, case-led on individual schools that were in trouble. And what we've done now with our new way of working is employ this team of people to work continuously across the 16 primary networks. So Claire's role is as a consortium partner, and it means that each of our consortium partners works with four consortia, these families of schools. And fortunately, they kind of fit closest to the ward or the political maps of the city. They don't match perfectly, but if you were to tell me, I'm concerned about this ward or these three wards, we can tell you which consortium most closely matches that. And what we now have is a kind of a much more detailed health map of each of those consortia. Not just in terms of knowing what the data tells us, which here are three schools that have done particularly well, but also that the level of trust and cohesiveness between these groups, so that we can be more realistic about saying, well, this group can help this group, or these schools can help these schools. And so that process of building the fabric of our school community, and it's interesting how it works across the city. Sutton Coldfield, an example, never gets to the top of our priority list because it's wealthy and it's doing quite well. But COVID brought the heads in Sutton together more closely than ever before. And so a good byproduct of COVID is we've got a stronger collegiality between the head teachers in Sutton than we had previously. That collegiality enables us to move work between schools. And the fact that we've got a group of people actively working with them in that facilitative way means we can do more of that. So we are seeing more of that happen. What would be useful maybe would be, Councillor, for us to give you some specific examples of that, where we could show how a group of schools, because they've engaged in a common concern. So the city's really big. How do we make sure that a school in Erdington is getting some really good help from a school in King's Standing? Well, the reality is that we've got these themes, these thematic projects. And so if Claire is working on writing across the city, we can see where the schools are that are best in writing. Our team of partners who are out with the different consortia can share what we've discovered from some really good practice in Kings Norton and make sure that it lands in Erdington.
Councillor McCarthy.
Just very quickly, we did have debates about how much data to give you on this item and the next one. It is a lot on both, and if you go away and think you've got questions that have only just occurred to you, everybody will be very willing to answer them. On the slides, I've clicked through from CMIS to the presentation, and the key points are there on that slide deck.
We Bob on Steve and under Simcox.
Yeah.
Okay. So they are there on the right hand.
Presentation yesterday.
And just to say on the maps, what's also interesting is if you then look at some of the stuff coming out of the City Observatory, so the deprivation indices actually going on in those areas and trying to match it up. And of course, as was clarified, these are where children live, not necessarily where they're going to school. So there's a piece of work around that to just understand about the schools that the children are going to, about what's going on in those wards that has an impact, whether it's deprivation or other factors. And we will keep putting the data together to help us to do.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
I just want to commend you for the report. It's a wealth of information. It is difficult to digest, but it is there in front of us. So that is particularly reassuring. Councillor Clancy has raised the point I was going to make, but I'm just curious. My ward you referred to as King Standing is it borders Sutton Visa. So looking at one of these maps here with Key Stage 2, the assignments in reading, writing, pupils reaching the expected standard. It's twice as good in the Sutton ward as it is in King Standing. They're right next to each other. Some of the children in King Standing will inevitably be going to school in Sutton and vice versa. And I'm just curious about why that disparity still exists to that degree when we're told that the performance for disadvantaged children and children on school meals seems to be so good. There just seems to be a disconnect there that I don't understand. So if there's any explanation on that, I'd love to hear it.
It is true that the performance is disadvantaged in preschool. That's like another basis. So in Birmingham, it's still lower for disadvantaged children. It might be that the explanation lies in there. So that story of being good for disadvantaged children needs to be thought of in terms of what does that actually mean here for all children. It's still worse. And it's possible maybe that if you want to do some more analysis on that in terms of progress for disadvantaged children in from deprivation and so in terms of deprivation, which we have to do.
It's better than the national for the same cohort, but it's not as good as those.
Yes, I understand that. It's so obvious that I don't know why I didn't see it.
But to be specific about King Standing, you're also needing to focus in on the other group that we didn't mention in terms of ethnically underachieving, and that's white disadvantaged, and particularly boys. Yeah. So in many ways, you know, the hard bit is that for us, our business, and the thing that we would engage most strongly with, and it helpfully, Claire's the consortium partner for the Perry Bar Consortium, which covers most of King Standing ward, is that we deal with the school. And so to go and look at the best school in King Standing, you'll see some great practice, and we would want to celebrate that, but we wouldn't want anything to mask the fact that we are really concerned about the fact that poverty leads to underachievement, leads to poor life chances, and the cycle carries on. And that's the big one.
Thank you. Just to remind everybody in the room that we need our big voices because the sound in this room is really poor, especially for people watching on live stream. Rabia Shami.
Yeah, I just again thank you. The report was amazing. So that the only thing that I'm sorry, I picked up something that doesn't make sense. It says that we have actually went back to 2018 levels of attainment for Key Stage 1 and 2, and obviously it's better than the national. It's better now because the national has dropped. We have seen that there have been disadvantaged children. We have talked about the fact that the map shows the children's residence, not their school, so we can't really judge schools in the areas. due to that, because children go to different areas for schooling. The one thing I wanted to ask was, the gap has not actually, the gap nationally has reduced, but we have actually fallen down. So we were aiming for 71% from 2019, but we fell to 62. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, so we're dealing with bad news. And the bad news is that COVID means that children are doing worse. And the conversation we were just having with Councillor Hughes, we're dealing with the bad news that poverty continues to have a huge impact on children's life chances. The reason why we make such a deal of the comparisons with the same children elsewhere and with how other authorities are doing, Core Citizen, Stat Neighbours, is because that's the only fair way we have of genuinely saying how well have Birmingham children and Birmingham schools done, given we've all been through a pandemic. So it tells us the truth of the fact that our schools have done a pretty good job. But the bigger truth is that COVID has been a huge impact, which is why standards, everything, in everything, for every group of children have come down. What every head teacher will tell you really powerfully, wherever they are in the city, is that the children who had the best support, the children with the best circumstances at home managed with the pandemic the children who needed help, and despite all the efforts saying we'll keep schools open for those children, the children who are the most likely to disengage and the ones who need the adult support the most did the worst through COVID.
And also what this shows is that the earlier, the younger the child, the bigger the gap.
Yeah.
So the impact actually of our schools is quite good, because if you take those 2 years of children not being in school at that very early age, it demonstrates that actually our schools do make a difference, a real difference, and that gap will have to track as those children go through, because they're starting out at a much lower point than they were 3 years ago. And that, I think, is probably, that will be the challenge for primary schools, and particularly in the next 3-4 years, won't it?
But sorry, just to say, there are a whole set of, you got a wealth of information. There's a whole load of other information that you didn't get, which is really important, which is about attendance and all the inclusion measures of exclusions and time lost, because now that the big impact into schools is not just that, early years children haven't learned their phonics, haven't learned to read so well, but a whole set of implications for behaviour and emotional dysregulation, and so all of those are really hot topics that we're concerned about.
Further, obviously we understand that there was a COVID fund given to the schools, there was support given, the schools were giving laptops to disadvantaged children, there were meals, everything was in place according to what we were told they were requirements of. We still see that children that dropped out, like the 2001 that we haven't included the data. We know that the teacher assessed that children receive face-to-face teaching sessions at the day. But with all that information, everything's there. Do we still think that it is so difficult to get back up and, because our English, our maths has been a problem since I don't know when. Historic, I think it's a dinosaur that has just traveled with us. So, but the English is definitely, we can see there are new apps that are given to schools. They buy into new, Beth has, I don't remember the name of there's a really nice thing which can assess if there's a gap in English children, English reading of children. And then you can tell if their reading age is according to their class age. I don't know, I forgot the name of the app, but that's really good. Everything is in place. Then why do we see that there's still?
So it goes back to Councillor Clancy's question about, are we really able to get the good and the bad schools to learn from each other? And so the fundamental big ticket items in school improvement continue to be good leadership, good teachers, good recruitment, NQTs. We've got a crisis of teachers coming into the profession, people wanting to come and work in the tougher schools and the toughest areas. You know, the employee shortage that is a challenge for the whole economy is a big problem. And those of you who've got connection with 20-year-olds or young people in their late teens, you watch them navigate the job market and work out flexible working and all the options and advantages that employers are now offering and having to compete to offer. Head teachers aren't going to start offering their NQTs, their young teachers, flexible working, so you can stay home Thursdays, Fridays and teach your maths from home on a Monday. It's not going to happen. So it's a problem.
Welcome to the meeting, Sue, and I know that you've been tied up with the Ofsted inspection.
It's been called the COVID gap nationally, isn't it? And I don't think we can underestimate the sacrifices our young people made during COVID, because child development means there's building blocks, aren't there? We've seen older children massively decreasing confidence, self-confidence, because they've not had those social interactions. You can't put those back, and schools are working hard to try to rebuild the confidence of the older children, but that isn't going to turn around anytime soon. And I think to recognise that is important. All the extra things that we've got to grapple with, probably the most worrying thing for me is that the very young children have missed out on playgroups, toddlers, stay and plays, learning to share. So our primary schools are working really hard to give them those opportunities late in the day. It's kind of like developmental delay, but because of experiences. So the good thing is schools are aware. Nationally, we're debating, you know, how do schools put, and parents who are also, you know, wanting to support their children learning, how do we do that, recognising this will take a good 5 years to work through the system, and these children, sadly, will have to work extra hard to not be impacted long term. But we know about those self-acts and we're grappling with them and dealing with them. So I think the point she made, of course, we've been worried about maths since the year dot, because some children really struggle with sequential maths skills. That's been made even harder because they've had time out of school, even though we did prioritise vulnerable children. Some of them got COVID, some of their families got COVID. They've had really bad attendance at school through nobody's fault. So I think it's great that this committee is cited on that, and probably something that we'd want to keep coming back to, even for national research, as to what has been the impact of COVID, because I think it should be documented, because our children didn't choose to have the schools closed. But that's been kind of forced on us all because of foreseen circumstances, not being critical. But I do think children have made massive sacrifices, and teachers who are working their socks off now to try to make back that ground. So I think it's great to celebrate the good news. I think it's really important to focus on where are we with our core skills that do rely so much on every day, that little bit of extra learning every day building up, and we haven't had that. So attendance still isn't where we want it to be, is it, Tim? We're really focusing on helping schools to support children and families. What are the barriers to attendance? We discussed that at cost of living as well, didn't we, Councillor McCarthy? Because some children, they're struggling to get uniforms, they're struggling to enable to travel to school. And hence we've had extra money to go to schools at Christmas to try to help alleviate some of those barriers. But this is a big picture, and it's right that we're talking about all the things that it impacts. At the end of the day, children's outcomes are what gives them their life chances. So it's right for this committee to focus on it, and it's right that we focus on it. And the final point is we really are trying to strengthen the school. Together, the heads of the consortia, to have these conversations more strategically with the local authority and with partners such as school nurses. You know, mental health of children has never been such a worrying place, actually, self-harming, those kind of things. How are we wrapping around schools to ensure that the barriers that children face are being supported, because schools can't do everything, that will help schools focus on the quality first teaching and helping those young people to make the most of the potential. So we are kind of aware of it and we're on it. We're not yet seeing the impact we'd like to, but I think next year we'll see a bit more progress. But I think it's great that this committee remains cited on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I've still got three members wanting to ask questions. Conscious of the time, so if we can keep it to questions rather than commentary, that'd be brilliant. Councillor Jan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, two very quick questions. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I do apologise if I am wrong. I heard, and first of all, thank you, Katie, and thank you, Tim. Brilliant, thank you. Children who are receiving free school meals are achieving better than children that are not receiving free school meals? Is there a particular reason why, or?
No. Children who are receiving free school meals and are disadvantaged are achieving better than the cohort nationally. So you're comparing them with children who are entitled to free school meals and are disadvantaged nationally. If your child who is on free school meals and disadvantaged and you're coming to a school in Birmingham, or might be elsewhere, that's what it's saying. It's Councillor Hughes' point that those who are not disadvantaged actually also do very well on that system. The gap.
Thank you. And my last question is, yes, we have a tiny percentage of Gypsy Roman community groups, but how can we capture this group so they can improve and also to support the young people and the families? How can we improve on that?
That's a hard question because as a small group, it's hard for us to put resource to them when there's a much bigger group who are also underachieving, which is why we're prioritising African, Caribbean, mixed race children. Our answer would be that good quality teachers and the principles of inclusion are the answer. In other words, when you look at every different ethnic group, every different need, every different bit of the population, you can't have a programme for every category. What you've got to then rely on is really good principles of excellent leadership, excellent teaching, informed by inclusive practice. So a good head teacher who knows all their children and a good teacher who engages with the needs of each learner and plans their lessons well will be the answer. I think there's another piece of work which we're talking to other partners about, partners in health, about how we train our professionals not to understand everything about the Gypsy Roma community or everything about the Somali community, but how to ask questions and approach people well who are different from you. And that principle of working with difference is good inclusive practice.
Want to come in on that question,
Just
Councillor
very quickly
McCarthy?
to say that I have regular discussions with Councillor Cotton about what more we could do to reach the Gypsy and Roma community, particularly from an early years point of view.
Thank you.
Councillor Maldina.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, a wonderful presentation. Thank you for all the data that you presented. Made a lot of sense, although there's quite a lot to take in. I appreciate that. And so thanks, Kate and Tim and everyone else that provided it. I wanted to ask a couple of questions we already answered because everybody asked that questions. So the way forward, I am from this background, so I understand the complexities of schools. What would be, I'm sure with all the data collected and the research carried out, there will be some recommendation strategies or action plans that you're kind of considering. So in our position as councillors, we sit in this committee, would we be able to look at that at some point and be able to understand a lot more so that we know that how we can actually contribute, play a role in that as well? I mean, so how do we take that forward?
I don't know, Sue or Kate or Chair, where the place of DLP is, because SEND is such an issue that it'd be really good if elected members had a report, especially on the DLP.
Yes, we've just signed that off, haven't we?
Yeah.
Just evaluated the developing learning programme, and there's some really good information there. So it'll give us a better understanding in terms of good the data's there. Yeah. We understand the difficult situation. You have a huge task on your hands, basically. It's not an easy, it's a very complex one. But then how do we simplify it and learning from other boroughs or other places that are doing better in comparison? What are the things that they are doing better under the same circumstances that we can adapt? And how we can as well, from an external point of view, have some eye on it, basically. I think that'd be great to have a follow-up and to see where this goes from here. Thank you for that.
Thanks for dinner. Kate?
Just wonder, taking on board Tim's point about recruitment and retention of the teaching profession, whether it's worth a specific report around that, because we know you can only make changes with good teachers and good leaders. And it would be really useful to know whether the recruitment and retention rates in Birmingham are different to national, a similar sort of thing that gives you that sort of analysis. Because that's where, with your proportion of maintained schools that you've got, as you know, you have some control over that, obviously not over academies, but it would be interesting just to know what those figures are telling you. are teachers leaving the profession more in Birmingham maintained schools than they are in Birmingham Academy schools? Are they actually staying longer? Those sorts of things.
Then what can we do about that?
And then you can actually go to strategy.
Yeah, yes.
Just that might be useful.
No, thank you, Kate. That would be very useful. I mean, we've only got to see with our teachers and school staff the action that they're having to currently take because they don't feel valued. They don't feel as though they're being rewarded for the amount of work that they undertake, because teaching is a really tough job, and we all know that. So I think the questions have been really good today. I think there's a couple of things that have been offered which we will take you up on, because I think the learning programme that's being developed, yes, we would very much like sight of that. That would be really useful once we're able to have that. I think it would be worth if we could have a discussion with and Karen with John Cotton to see if there is anything that could be brought to committee around the work being done with Gypsy Roma traveller communities, and see how that can be tied into the education work. Some information around the schools consortia might be of interest, I think, to see what work that's been progressed, and then examples of schools and good practice that was discussed earlier. And Tim, you talked about a developing local provision project.
Yeah, CLP project.
Is that the same? That's the same thing. That's fine. I thought it probably was. So if we could, I'm sure Amanda's got track of all of those items, and those are more information that could come to committee. Councillor Clancy?
Yes, sorry, I did omit one of the questions. I don't know whether it's relevant now because we're at this stage of the meeting.
Okay, really quickly then.
Yeah, it was because obviously the topic has been around the pandemic, and I think there's still some good stuff even within the pandemic. But I did want to ask you, Tim, about the catch-up funding actually, and about the schools. And we can leave this to another time if you want, or I can email you. I was just wondering about the catch-up funding that obviously was handed out for Birmingham, and whether that was on your radar and how that had been allocated, or was it down to the school's autonomy to say, well, we've got it, we've absorbed it, don't worry about it.
The good thing is to give a technical report on, but it's been rubbish. So it's my you can that's not. Problems with the national scheme that has not worked well for Birmingham because of, but there's a detailed story there. So giving you an off the cuff, somewhat flippant how head teachers feel about it word, it's not a very complimentary one, but there's a more formal.
So again, there's more information that could come back on that. That's great. So there's quite a lot of information there to still come back in addition to all of the information we've already had. So lots of reading material. I mean, there are other things around the low attainment rates of SEND children, but clearly we'll cover that in the next item. So we're going to note the report. Thank you very much for your contributions. I'm conscious of the time, so we're going to. Sorry, I'm just going to bring Fiona in because she's just got something.
Yeah, I just wanted to reference the item on attainment had been on the work programme since the beginning of the year, but the detail on ethnicity was also partly from the motion at council in November. So I just wanted to reference that actually the committee discharged what you've been asked to do by City Council with this report, but obviously it's an ongoing piece of work with further work that the committee will consider.
Thank you, Fiona. Sorry, Rabia, I really do need to move on. I'm really sorry because we're running over now. So I'm going to introduce, we've already sort of introduced Sue, but not formally, Sue Harrison, Strategic Director of Children and Families. And we've also got Razia Butt with us, who is an independent education advisor. So we'll go straight over to talk about school exclusions, part-time tables and unsuitable school places. I don't know who wants to kick off.
Yes,
Sue?
Razia's going to be presenting. She's working closely with council colleagues and schools very much on this agenda. I know you've been asking for this information for a while. So we pulled it all together and thought who better to help present it around here who's in the thick of it, going to school. So over to you, Nancy.
Thank you. So the members asked us to present to this committee on the information on children with SEND needs with education, health and care classes that are permanently excluded, children without suitable school place and the support that's in place for children on part-time timetables. We'll cover that in this presentation, and we'll also show the members what we're doing about it. I wanted to situate this within a wider ambition on children and families. So the children that we're reporting about their experiences to this committee fit within a wider group of children who are on that site, and you've mentioned Gypsy River children, Northwest Somali, children of Somali heritage. So there is a dedicated teacher who supports children with Gypsy River heritage. He knows the community very, very well and supports engagement and works across all children seeking asylum and refugee children as well. Looking at the patterns of travel across Europe, the ages and stages, and linking into the wider agenda around supporting children, particularly around the relationships and sex education that you'll know about well. So within this cohort, children may be accessed at different points in their lives. Minoritised children, if we look at those through an intersectional lens, are overrepresented in these cohorts, and we hope to be able to report on progress on these areas. I know that Helen Lennis, the Director of Study and Inclusion, is reporting to this committee in the near future. So looking at permanent exclusions, the data for 21-22 isn't published until July, so we're working on data whether for live. There's 2019-20 and 2020-21, when most children are out of school due to COVID lockdowns and tier restrictions. Remain above the overall national rate and across the education phases, but most notably in primary schools. Primary ranks 102 out of 152 local authorities overall, and rank the secondary school pupils at 87, and the primary schools ranking at 89. The issue here is with primary school permanent exclusions. But if you look at the graph and look at all schools, that indicate that there are signs of improvement there, and that's because of the targeted work emerging from the permanent exclusion rates in primary schools in Birmingham are higher than the whole city and statistical neighbourhood. One group on this, we're doing better than we were doing in 18-19 with secondary. Going on to permanent exclusions for children with SEND, so the rates for children with an EHCP and those with SEND support have reduced to a third of the rates in 2017-18, but this remains slightly higher than the national rates for these cohorts of children. This is the cohort we specifically asked about. The gap is narrowing in SEND support. If you look at the gap 1920 and 2021, we're almost in line with national now, but obviously we will report on the new figures when they come out. And this isn't just because of the pandemic. Birmingham rates have improved better than national, so we can report on the actual numbers as they come out. Suspensions. Suspension rates are lower than the national average overall. Birmingham is ranked 56 out of 152 authorities. But 1920 and 2021, when most children were out of school, suspension rates fell at first and rose slightly in the second year. Suspension rates in primary schools remain higher than national, and Birmingham is ranked 114 out of 152 local authorities. Suspension rates in secondary schools in Birmingham are ranked 49 out of 152. Birmingham secondary schools continue to outperform the national average for suspensions. This is overall including SEND, but this mirrors the picture that we have for permanent exclusion. Positive picture compared to national, the issues in primary schools such as the same, but it's still in line with national needs. So, working to get primary to mirror the improvement in secondary, then that would be possible. Birmingham secondary schools continue to outperform comparative authorities for suspensions, and primary schools in Birmingham are higher than reported. Neighbours. Are working closely with partners and with Birmingham Children's Trust. So that rates falling for children with an EHCP and risen slightly for children with SEND no SEND needs, but varying suspension rates remain significantly lower than the national levels for all these cohorts. Striving to make it better, Birmingham was consistently better than national for both groups. Many factors contribute to the picture overall, including social and emotional issues, mental health and wellbeing during and emerging from the pandemic, as we've already talked about. It's also affected nationally. So now this is what we are doing about it. There's a new early health inclusion panel that's established by Birmingham Children's Trust Early Health Team and the Council of the Exclusions Group in the autumn of 22. Exclusion from primary got each children. I told you that primary schools is the issue for both exclusions and suspension. Same primary school children. So there's a rigorous process in place and it's strengthening. An early indicator showing that this is having an impact, but it's about improving partnerships. It's a great view of children's experience overall, and it's about repairing the system overall. It links into the development of the trauma and the DLP project that we've already spoken about, that's coming back to this committee. It's about operating and developing locality provision that really responds to needs of children where they are. And of course, I couldn't miss out the UNICEF Rights Respecting Programme, which shows the national research demonstrates that that has a positive impact on reducing exclusions overall. And we have, as you know, 250 schools in the city getting that award. In terms of exclusions and suspensions, we're improving the data collection to inform the action. So there's different systems, so we need to get a view across the different formats to get a single view of children to be able to respond to their needs. We're developing proactive approaches to support schools with relationship approaches that links into formal practice. And challenging those schools where exclusions and suspensions could be avoided. And we have a DFE funded programme in Birmingham over the next 3 years, which is the Safe Task Force, and that's the school-led programme, £6 million.
Razia, sorry to interrupt you. We have been told that people are struggling to hear you. So if you could try and
get a very low tone voice.
Yes, increase volume a little bit, that'd be great.
In schools, so that's OBS, referral unit to develop use of turnaround places that enable children to stay in their school place and to support mainstream effectively to children. So sharing the knowledge about how to support children very early on using the Early Help strategy to do that. So better support earlier on to provide children interventions. So moving on to children without a school place. So this is the current. We're improving integrated data capture, as I've said before, across the directorate. Celon have to operate within the statutory process with related timescales, but we are supporting the development of the DLP. This is addressing this through locality delivery. There's sufficiency multidisciplinary tough and finish group, which have a 5 to 10 year plan. There are issues here around, if we look at EHCP, children missing education, it's a very small cohort. We know there's 2 are in mainstream, on roll in mainstream schools, but the others are within troubled out, like across the area or out the country. To help within this cohort, children who are in a mainstream school that are waiting for special school place. We've got children who are not in education but are on the priority list, but they're all known to the home bridging team. And we've got a cohort of children who are not on roll, are on the children missing education radar, and there's a split with those waiting for special school, 97 places, and 29 of those waiting for mainstream. We report on those that are awaiting special for over 12 weeks, that all of those cohorts have a timescale attached to them. So going on to what support is in place. So for children who have an EHCP without a school place, they're referred to the home bridging team. That bridging team provides support for transition and stays in touch to ensure that children are well supported. They provide a package of support, and sometimes that's the balance of supported transition into school places to make sure that children can access learning. For all other children's school admissions, so including in year admissions, so we have children that are new to area and children that movement within the year. So in year admission, the team works with them to support children back into school. And for children whose education stands to be unsuitable, so that's the educational cohort, they will be supported to return to school. So they'll be placed in the nearest school. And if there's no taking of that, then we will look at other measures, including statutory attendance orders, to ensure that children are receiving suitable education. So what we know about children without a school place in the council's response, so we need to increase special school spaces, and we have a programme of expansion of resource spaces and free schools. So we'll know that they is successful by the 7th of February, but that's been supported by the Centre Commissioner. We're prioritising a sufficiency strategy to plan longer term, and we can report on this at the following committee. In parallel, we're working on a 5 to 10 year plan in terms of sufficiency, and the priority focuses on assessing children properly to ensure that we get the offer for them right in the first place, so that we don't have children that don't have the right provision waiting for the right provision to be available to them. And we're putting extra capacity into centre commissioning as having fun. And to the future committee. For children on part-time timetables, so in total there are 530 on part-time timetables. You can see the split there between girls and boys. Boys are slightly overrepresented, and it's for all the reasons as well that we've talked about in the earlier presentation. This is being addressed through a number of work streams, providing support and early intervention. So Birmingham has a global majority population in the table we see, despite some differences. The larger minoritised populations in Birmingham, as we've heard in the earlier presentation, white, Asian or Asian British, and black British broadly represented in the part-time time-table population. We are feeding into the council strategy, everyone's got everyone's business. There's a section on the education response there. And that's also focusing on improving support through the DLP programme. It also links to the work we're doing around anti-discriminatory practice and anti-racist pedagogy for learning, and supporting schools through the training with an organisation called BRAC, where we looked at. So this reporting on part-time timetables in terms of year groups and hours was introduced in September. It needs finessing. We rely on schools to input this data for us to be able to analyse it correctly. So the number of children in Key Stage 4 is a concern. It's potentially reducing their chances of fulfilling their GCSE potential. We also need to better understand why children in Year 1 are not in full time, and whether they have unidentified needs. And again, we're talking about emerging from the pandemic, low take-up of early education and so on, and whether children need additional support or have identified needs.
Sorry, what's that? Sure, I can put my hand up for afterwards, but not for now. Okay.
Majority of children on a part-time provision are at school between 11 and 20 hours. Hours in a part-time provision is not specified, although about 21% of children, but as I said, this is a new reporting that was introduced in the last term. The action for us is to establish this information alongside how long the part-time timetable has been in place. This will enable us to prioritise children and work with schools to return children to full-time. So 113 children where we don't know how many hours they're attending, and we also don't know whether the part-time timetable is reducing, and whether that reporting is secure around knowing that they're back in education. A big proportion of the children reported here are children with special educational needs. Schools are telling us that children aren't able to cope with full-time basis, and we need to address that through the strategy. We're analysing this in detail, and SENA are supporting the environment and the reintegration so that part-time timetables should only be used on a short-term basis. Transition, for example. So phase 1 of the DLP is laying the foundation for schools to use the funding effectively. enabling consortiums to come up with local solutions, as Tim has already explained. So we can see that children reported on 30 hours or plus is the recording issue. So the maximum allowance is 25, so we know that the system needs refining. So when we have better data, we'll be doing a deep dive, identifying the barriers to full-time inclusion, and also looking for the patterns and things that will emerge from richer data that we'll be able to address. So, of the 530 children on part-time timetables, nearly 200 are reasoned by the unknown or other. Again, this we need to do improvement in the data itself. It's essential that we capture the full picture of reasons in order to know where to focus our future efforts. The other area of concern here is the 85 children on part-time timetables for behaviour reasons or risk of exclusion. The latest DfE guidance makes it really clear that reduced timetables should not be used to address behaviour concerns, and therefore understanding what's happening in this group is a priority. So if you add together unknown and other, that's the group we're focusing on the improvement plan. The school holds the information duty to inform the local authority, so securing to ensure there is action around any children that have been on a part-time timetable for longer than 6 weeks. DfE guidance again makes it really clear that children should only be on a part-time timetable to enable the integration of address behavioural issues. As I said, we only know that they've got a referral when the part-time timetable ceases or reduces. We're focusing on management there. We're doing some development work within the Impulse system to enable a better grip of the data, and that's part of the improvement planning as well. It's also part of the SEND improvement journey and making sure that statutory duties are being adhered to and prioritising vulnerable groups so that we have a clear line of sight. So there's team management within the SANAR to ensure that a team manager has responsibility for line of sight for children in vulnerable groups. So in terms of the council's response to part-time timetables, so we're looking at mechanisms to enable identification of reasons and time so we can monitor that more effectively. We're looking at the DLP and outreach from special schools to share their knowledge and experience. And these are consortia-led responsive, which I'm sure will go to a future committee. So the team managers having an oversight of children on part-time timetables from a SENAR perspective will oversight and we'll have a better grip on what's happening with the group. We're working with Birmingham Children's Trust to wrap around and support families to ensure that they're accessing help much earlier, and plans to work with the Regional Schools Commission and Regional Directors Office to understand how this works across maintained and academies and how we can integrate that response. So, as a whole system response to children who are out of sight during various stages of their life, we're looking at children that are shared in the first slide around children who we may not have sight of through their life course. Then we're doing a deep dive into service areas to make sure that we've got the right leadership in place, we've got the right processes in place, that the practice is secure and that the culture is child-centred and family-centred. Making sure that services understand their statutory duties really well and are meeting the statutory responsibilities, so the checks and balances around that. We're looking at governance and oversight and making sure that the accountability is in place, particularly around corporate safeguarding. There's a big focus on the strategic use of data because there are many data systems that we have to look at to get a single view of the child and to understand their experiences across the life course. There's a big focus on integrated assessment processes, integrated understandings across health, across social care, across education to make sure that we have a single view of the child, that we're wrapping around families together, not in silos. We're also reviewing the outputs of the system to see which children are doing really well from the system and which children are not doing very well. Following children and young people across the system to children instead of just looking at them in terms of which service area is supporting them. Maximising the opportunities to listen to the views and experiences of the children and families. So really understanding the child's voice, not just knowing that child is part of the process, but they've been able to and have been encouraged to share their views on the experiences of our systems, building opportunities to increase learning and development the partnerships that we already have in place, making sure that we're working effectively so we're understanding the impact of the practice and then improving it through high challenge, better professional development. It's also listening to the work calls about the experiences of what happens to children and families as they navigate their way through our systems. So I look forward to coming back to update.
Overview of the working train, and again, as Rosie said, happy to focus on anything in terms of new app. Working hard with that, with Tim and Claire and colleagues, because this information is as good as schools give us. And so working in partnership with schools is really important. They're facing. It seems to me that behaviour is a big barrier to inclusion in lots of different ways. And the children with them who are struggling the most are the ones who have emotional, social. More about that all the time. So there is something about just making it repeatedly for your people to manage their own behaviour, how to support families who are perhaps struggling to support their young people, and how do we have an inclusive system. So I didn't think it was important. This is answered more than the questions that you asked. I'm aware of that, but these hidden lives are really important. Children that are not in the system are at risk, aren't they, because they're not in our sight. So I did want Raji to talk about all the groups of children as well as the groups that you've asked about, because it's critical that as a system, those children support them and their families. And ideally, we want them in the system, don't we? We want them participating, we want them achieving, and we want to get great jobs and be part of great citizens that they're doing. So there's a lot to take in here again, and I apologise in advance for that. But I will keep bringing it back. We will get used to the narrative, and we will get used to the kind of lines of inquiry that you want us to pursue. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Razia. Thank you, Sue. Sue, just on that last point, what sort of timescale do you think would be fair to ask for an update on this particular bit of the work to see how it's progressing? So, a time frame to come back to committee on this?
I think if you give us 6 months to show it back, Chair, it's probably a better use of the time rather than saying quarterly, or if we have to have some time to demonstrate that. We'll have news for you.
Thank you, thank you. Councillor Birmingham, Councillor Hughes and Councillor Jan.
Excellent report, really interesting and in places terrifying to read. A couple of points. When you do the breakdowns, do we have a breakdown for those children who are in care, who are under any of those categories? And also, after COVID, I know that skews the figures a bit, but was there a problem? Because I know I've heard of it's anecdotal, but personal stories of children who themselves don't want to go back to school because there's almost an anxiety that they're in their safe home. They don't want to go back to the great scary place. And I wondered if we had any information on that have now only either in the unknown figure of the 127, which is a scary figure in itself, but also maybe have gone to homeschooling, or if there's any information.
We do know from the data that we have on children that's educated that there is still quite a chunk where the reason for that is COVID. So that probably needs reviewing. So I will put that department in that. A bunch of children that moved into homeschooling but as COVID.
The engagement with elective home education workers, they're offering that opportunity to families all the time, and particularly through every stage of engagement. Say, would you like a school place for your child? And we'll help you to do that. And so encouraging parents to think about
if that child won't go to school because of fear rather than choice.
It's putting the therapeutic
Yeah,
response in place
yeah.
for the child and the family and to ensure that
Yeah.
the right school place is there for the child. So that's been strongly encouraged for our children.
I can also reassurance on this regards to children known to trust. So all children that are on a child in need, child protection plan, or they're in care, we have regular meetings to talk about those children. They're not out of sight.
Oh, no, I understand that. I just wondered out of interest.
So we can bring, but we recommend that young people are not electrically uneducated, for example, to find those school places. And there's a really clear steer with partners. We can bring that information, but I'm more worried, to be quite honest, about the children that are not in the sight of the trust, because we do know that when they're working with the trust, we know where they are and we know how to support them. And there's some good work going on there. As ever, the biggest worry is not knowing what we don't know what we don't know. And the children that are hidden from sight, some of them have been hidden, for a long time. If you never send your child to a nursery, if you never send your child to a school, feasibly, we might not know until a housing officer goes to do a repair and notices that a child, isn't at school on a school day. We follow up that information. So there's a big push, isn't there, as across the council, who is in contact in our communities. That's why local members are really critical as well, because some of our families, unfortunately, don't trust the system, do they? They don't want to talk to official people. So it's always a case of making sure we've got enough outreach workers that can be trusted by the communities in order to help them understand that we want to help and support those children. But in terms of the categories of children with the Children's Trust, I can present the information, but I wouldn't think it will be much of a line of inquiry for you.
Thank you, Chair. Unlike my colleague here, I'm afraid I just can't hide my disappointment in this report. The report is in response to questions that I asked quite some months ago. I'll just point you to, I'm looking at page 164, request from the committee. Information on how many excluded children have sent, figures on children who haven't got a school place, information on children affected by part-time timetables. Now, I will concede that there is some information there on children affected by part-time timetables, but it doesn't tell us how many excluded children have SEND needs. It doesn't tell us how many children haven't got a school place. So the report fails almost entirely to answer the questions that are raised. When I come to the following page, it's 165 in the pack. It says children missing education and out of sight. Now, I generally don't know what that means. I don't know. I don't understand how a child with an EHCP is missing education and out of sight. I don't understand how having insecure immigration status makes you missing education and out of sight. To me, it just seems like a random heading with a random bunch of bullet points. And just this is just me personally on the out of sight thing. It seems to me a strange term, at least when we talk about disadvantaged children, we have a definition, we know what it means. Out of sight makes it sound like it's the child's fault. It makes it sound like you couldn't see them if you were looking for them. I think it's very strange terminology, Chair. We come on to the next page, permanent exclusions, it says there. Now, it just seems to me that this is completely lacking in any real context. We have a scale on the left of the page, the percentage scale, but we don't know what it's a percentage. Obviously, we know it's out of 100, but we don't know how many actual children we're talking about. And the scale covers 1/4%. So the maximum movement within this is 0.2%. Now, I personally don't think that is particularly significant. So I'm not sure what the purpose of the graph is. On top of that, of course, I mean, we can see rates of exclusion.
Want to leave it there and come back?
No, I don't, Chair. I'm afraid I've got a lot to say. That the information here, some of this information is 5 years old, and the information since then is coloured by COVID. So I really don't understand the relevance of it. Yeah, it doesn't give us any meaningful information at all. I'll leave it at that on that page, yeah. We come on to permanent exclusions. So here, it looks like we're excluding 77 kids, 10,000 pupils we send. 32 of them have an EHCP. So it looks like we have an exclusion rate of 97 pupils per 10,000 pupils, and that 77 of those 97 have special educational needs. So again, a significant number of children being excluded with SEND. On the suspension staff, one of the things that does trouble me is that suspensions can be for any period of time, I believe up to 45 days. I think there's a distinction between suspensions for 5 days and less and 6 days and more, because there then comes into play an obligation to ensure that the child has a full-time education. And I'm not sure that that's being followed. So I would like to see, I don't know if it's reasonably doable, a distinction in these figures between those of less than 5 days and more than 5 days. With suspension, and I'm always wary of treading into an area that involves mathematics. But it looks like we've got 3,000 suspensions of children we send per 10,000 pupils, and that half of them have an EHCP. Now, to me, that's a startlingly high figure, and just one, I think, clearly worthy of further investigation. I'm going to skip that personally. So on page 171, it says we're going to improve data collection. I don't see any evidence here that data collection is being improved if we're being presented with data that's not relevant and is up to 5 years out of date. Children without a school place. So children not in education. This is split up here, but it does add up to a significant number of children not getting an education. And again, significant number of these are children with a EHCP, and as I said, without a school place. On support provided for children who aren't in school, it does say here that the children refer to the home bridging team and that a package of support is developed for the child. I would like a reassurance that every child does get a package of support, and I wonder how many of them do actually have a home tutor for all of the children who are without a school place, and it's quite burdensome, Chair. It also it says that for all other children, school admissions, in-year admissions team work to support children back into school. Now, my experience is that the school admissions, in-year admissions team never help support children back into school other than the phased transfer times. I've contacted them on behalf of parents in the past, and the stock answer I get is, well, tell the parent to find a school and apply for it. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Part-time timetables. Okay, there's a bit of information there about the gender split. The graph on ethnicity. I'm not sure that provides any useful information because we don't know what percentage of the school population each of these groups is. So the fact that, for instance, 9% of them are black or black British, without knowing the total number, I don't think that tells us anything particularly useful. The information on part-time timetables, again, the real issue here was alluded to earlier, is how long children are on part-time timetables for. So I know of children who have been on part-time timetables for a significant amount of time, and they're on a part-time timetable because the school cannot meet their needs. So unless or until another school is found, that isn't going to change. So I think it would be helpful to have information on how long children have been on the various part-time timetables, so that we can eye on that.
I have to rush you, Councillor Hughes.
Okay, then just on the next slide, it's got them split down into different categories: medical, emotional, social need, behaviour, anxiety, and mental health. I'm not quite sure how distinct those groups are. And again, to me, all of them categories indicate kids that might have unmet needs. I'm going to skip, Chair, then to just basically my disappointment in that this hasn't provided any of the information that I've asked for. And what I find a little bit galling is that this information was asked for some months ago. And yet a member who submitted a written question at the last council meeting was told that we have 159 children with EHCPs currently with no school place. We have 196 children in mainstream schools waiting for a suitable school place. So that's over 350 children who aren't getting a suitable education at the moment. And weirdly, because of the tactics currently used by SENA, we have another very strange category of child, and that is children with an EHCP in a mainstream school waiting for a mainstream school place. Now, I would imagine a lot of people would think if you're waiting for a mainstream place and that you're waiting in a mainstream school, that's not a bad place to be. But of course, the school that they're in isn't named in the EHCP, so isn't obliged to provide the support in that plan. So again, yet again, we have children with EHCPs that have technically been finalised by SENA that bring absolutely no benefit to the child. So I think that's a category that should be incorporated. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. There were an awful lot of questions there. I think in the main, it was seeking clarity on some of the information that hasn't been provided today. And I think we can send an email through outlining some of the key questions to see whether we can get that information back. Would you be happy with that, Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, I think my fundamental point, that the questions I asked and what we've been presented with is basically a chunk of out-of-date information up to 5 years old that doesn't answer the question I asked. And yet these questions were answered in a written question a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. So clearly the information's out there. Shouldn't be too difficult to put it together in an email response to committee once we've sent that through after this meeting. Were there any other parts of Councillor Hughes's questions that you can pick up on
I think it was
now?
Detailed and technical, Chair, that very helpful to have them in writing, and then our data analyst responding.
Thank you. Happy with that, Councillor Hughes?
Yeah.
Yep. Lovely. Councillor Jan.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Razia. Thank you from what you've explained two questions. You mentioned schools to input data correctly, so then you are aware of what's going on. Do they, firstly? And second one is, in regards to young people being on a part-time timetable, and I'm a strong believer in this, the ones that are on a part-time timetable, potentially solution is to learn them skills while they're not in school, like bricklaying, construction, engineering, healthcare. So whilst they're not in school based, but they're still learning something and they're learning skills. And is that possible? Thank you, Chair.
No, just a question about data in the first place and what schools do. So some of the data is what schools statutorily have to collect and input. So the exclusions data would fit into that. Part-time timetables is where we've set up a data collection form. So that question about school reliability.
So we're working with schools to make sure that they're able to give us the data correctly.
I mean, we had our inclusion conferences in the summer, and some head teachers noted that this is an extra responsibility on them, you know, which Beth will talk about, and it is, but we can't get that information any other way. So we've really pushed the schools to support us with information, and we're starting now to do some quality testing to support them in making sure that information is accurate. The school shouldn't be recording a young person on part-time timetable if in fact that they're engaged in practical learning somewhere else. The part-time timetable definition is children literally at home the rest of the time, not engaged. And many schools are really good at commissioning alternative educational pathways for their young people. It keeps them engaged. We're really positive about that as well, but that should not be counted as a part-time timetable. That said, some schools might still be learning how to quantify the information that we've asked for. I'm not saying none of those are in, but if they are, it's erroneous reporting by the school.
Thank you very much. I mean, you know, there are some really important areas being covered because it does tie in very much to the previous item in terms of the lower attainment levels for SEND children. So we need to make sure that where particularly SEND children are only having part-time timetables at home, that they're receiving, you know, the level of education that meets their needs and supports. That's really important. I think also with I don't know whether this fits in with the schools consortia, Sue, in terms of trying to develop some sort of generalised structure, process, system, whatever, that schools have a process to respond appropriately to the behaviour deemed sometimes bad behaviour by schools of children with special needs, and how those children are responded to by individual schools in terms of punishment that's given out for those behaviour displays. And I personally, you know, one of my grandchildren regularly receives detentions despite being diagnosed with special needs, and it's very difficult for him and his parents to deal with that situation. So I think, you know, maybe the schools consortia bit will pick some of those discussions up, and I hope they would. Councillor McCarthy's got her hand up.
Just to say that BEP have also done some work on this. They had the lead Ofsted inspector for inclusion at their conference explaining that future Ofsted inspections would begin and end with inclusion. And they also had an excellent speaker on restorative practice, which is about looking for the reasons for behaviour, whether it's the child's circumstances or the child's additional needs. So BEP too are working on these issues to try and get schools to take every opportunity to keep children in school, because we know that's where they do best.
Of course. And it's particularly notable, I think, with mainstream schools that tend to have a policy in place that is for all pupils, no matter what. So I think that's really important. So I'll give you the last word on this item.
Just to reference as well that we're now commissioning our special schools to do more outreach work to support many different schools. And this is about showing good practice because inevitably focus on inconsistencies. I've got some really inclusive schools with what we've just described, your relative isn't happening. So it is about using the consortium absolutely to help schools understand the practice that we can demonstrate and to make sure that children are all included.
That goes full circle to what we asked for earlier in terms of the good practice that Tim nodded to as one of our requests. Fiona.
I just want to reference a lot of what's been discussed at the meeting today, cross-references with the two inquiries that members of the committee are involved in around targeting exploitation, about children at risk who aren't at school, and also young people's mental health. So, I mean, it's a public committee meeting, so this information is available, but I will feed it through to the inquiry that I'm supporting and make sure it goes through to your inquiry as well, so it can inform that work as well.
Thank you, Fiona. Thanks very much, Razia, for coming and presenting with us today. I know that you probably weren't expecting to be here, so we're very grateful that you gave up the time to come and do this. I am going to move us on because we are very nearly out of time. Well, we are out of time, but I'm going to just go through the next couple of items really quickly. The next item is our work programme, and we sort of agreed to bring back in 6 months' time some of the work that we've just been discussing, but we don't need to plot that in today, I don't think. I think we can work out the best place for that to come. But the Birmingham Children's Safeguarding Partnership were going to come to today's meeting, but because their annual report hasn't yet been finalised, they asked if they could come to the April meeting. Now, previously, we did agree to extend today's meeting by 45 minutes to allow for 3 items. So I'm asking again if we can extend April's meeting by 45 minutes, so to make sure that we have those 3 items covered. So if you can make sure that you, in your diary, so that you're not running out at 12 o'clock, that'd be brilliant. And everybody agrees to that? Yes, thank you. Our next meeting is the Glasses 5th of April. In these rooms. Have we got any requests for call-ins? Not that I know of. Thank you very much. And any urgent business? No, so it just leaves me to ask for your authority to chair and officers in between meetings. Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you can just stay where you are just for a couple of minutes while we turn the live stream off. And thank you very much for your contribution and time.
Thank you. Just hang in.